Central Church leadership, many members in Mexico called for native Mexicans to be their leaders. They called the saints with these ideas the Conventionists. In 1932, many members were fed up with the lack of leadership from the church. They sent a letter to Salt Lake City asking for a native Mexican leader to be their mission president. This meeting was called the First Convention. A few years later, a second convention was held. This time, President Ivins and an apostle, Elder Melvin J. Ballard, reprimanded the saints for sending petitions to church headquarters. They made sure that these saints would know that there would be native leadership coming soon. However, when Harold W. Pratt was made president in 1934, members in the nation of Mexico were again disappointed. They held another convention in 1936, and there created their own groups, which they called the Third Conventionalists. Native Mexican Abel Paez was the appointed leader of this group. Eventually, every single one of the men and women that followed the Third Conventionalists were excommunicated.
I believe that one of the most transcendent events that few members are familiar with is the resolution of the Third Convention. Through all of President Pierce's efforts, with help from his counselor, Harold Brown, who was always at his side. And then when President George Albert Smith came to Mexico and unified the church in Mexico, it was a very important time because the church in itself was weak. It was divided. And its unification was, for me, I believe, extremely important. It had to be done, but it was not easy.
By 1945, President Pierce was working hard to bring many of these Third Conventionalist members back into the fold by showing the First Presidency their potential for leadership. The excommunication decree, as a result, was removed and changed to disfellowshipment. This allowed the members not to be rebaptized, but just to come back into the church with open arms. President George Albert Smith came down to Mexico City and talked with these members personally. They still believed that he was a modern prophet and sustained him after a mighty talk.
They, I say again, were the southernmost colony of the great Western colonization. The church was small in those years. In 1949, there were only 50 stakes in the church. That's not very many.
In the years 1952 to 1959, a great missionary expansion happened within the church. Many of the native Mayans were given a chance to hear the gospel, as well as many other Native American tribes in Mexico. Through 1969, the church was on a roll. Their membership numbers grew, and finally saw more excitement in investigators. A school was established and made to hold over 2,000 students. All of these improvements saw the church into a new era of growth that still goes on today. From the years 1970 to 1972, the membership of the church in Mexico jumped from 70,000 to over 100,000 people. A few general authorities, including Harold B. Lee, got to see this excitement firsthand in Mexico City. At an area conference in 1972, 17,000 saints gathered from all over the country just to hear the prophet of the Lord. President Lee gave these remarks pointing out the exciting growth happening at the time.
Many have wondered why this conference is being held in Mexico City, to give recognition and to commend the wonderful labors of the many who have labored over the years. They have been instrumental in bringing about the tremendous growth of the church in these countries. Every time I come to this republic, I am touched by the deep faith, dedication, and the warm friendliness of the Mexican people. They are a choice people.
Nunca puede uno menospreciar.
I could never undermine the value of my time as a mission president. The memories that I have, getting to know so many missionaries, and to see those branches growing, to help and strengthen the districts, so that many of them could become stakes, as none of them were at that time. It was an incredible time. Then, in 80 to 82, as the director of the church educational system in Mexico, when there were 42 schools in Mexico, to get to know that republic, travel all over the area, get to know the schools, to get to know the leaders. It was a very beautiful time. But it was a very difficult time because of all the growth that was taking place in Mexico.
Un tiempo de mucho crecimiento en México.
President Spencer W. Kimball, a counselor under Harold B. Lee, decided to visit a local family's family home evening. How would you like to have the prophet of the Lord bring you flowers or play the piano to I Am a Child of God? Needless to say, the children and mother of the family did not sleep at all that night. This unannounced visit by President Kimball saw the brethren visit a small church school. Out of 50 kids who got a chance to meet and greet the prophet, one of the boys said it was like he came out of heaven. Other Mexican saints would agree that they felt the power of the Lord as they saw these great men up close and personal. Another future president of the church, Elder Howard W. Hunter, then of the Quorum of the 12, visited Mexico City in 1975. At this time, there were many members of the church, too many to be divided into just 5 stakes. Elder Hunter decided then to divide these 5 stakes into 15 new ones. Brother Horacio Tenorio was one of the brethren that was called to be a stake president at the time. He says he has never forgotten the experience.
They could see that there were a lot of members, large wards, large stakes, and very large districts. Under inspiration, they made that division. The extraordinary part was that it was all done in one weekend. I remember that there was a big effort. They did all the interviews in the chapel. Being called was an extraordinary experience. We couldn't believe what was happening, having been called to be a stake president.
Just 1 year after this historic expansion, a temple was announced and dedicated in 1983. A young Gordon B. Hinckley, then a counselor in the first presidency of the church, offered this prayer in dedicating the Mexico City temple. He said, "Bless thy saints in this great land, and those from other lands who will use this temple. Most have in their veins the blood of Father Lehi. Thou hast kept thine ancient promises.